Okay, so today in chapter 15, we'll be discussing the parent child relationships, relations in high risk families, fragile families. In fragile families, the family system cannot withstand the numerous assaults on its well being and may become dysfunctional or dis- disintegrate. Um, Fragile basically means, in this context and form, liable to break. In some extreme cases, family becomes a dangerous place for children, and simply there are several risk factors in interact to escalate the detrimental effects on the family. One risk factor normally leads to the other in fragile families. Some of the factors that are among the list of the factors here increase the fragility of families. I'm not gonna read all of them, but just a few are just poverty and all of the factors linked to limited resources, economic and otherwise, the lack of knowledge concerning childcare and parenting, chronic illness, disability, depression, and children with behavior problems, and the lack of integration into a social or civic community. For example, a social, religious, or other groups that support family values. Now, there are a few facts about child abuse and neglect. About every 6 minutes, reports of a child maltreatment are received by state and local agencies in the United States each year. About 740,000 victims of child abuse or neglect are treated in hospitals, emergency rooms, or in the United States each year. In 2008, 772,000 children were found to be victims of maltreatment by protective services. 78% of child victims experienced neglect. Almost 17% were physically abused. Fewer than 10% were sexually abused. Normally, children from birth to age 1 have the highest rates of victimization at 20 per 1,000 children. About 1 in 50 infants in the United States are neglected or abused, and nearly one third of them are newborns. Among the ethnic groups, 44.8% of Caucasians, 21.9% of African Americans, and 21.4% of Hispanic children have the highest rates of victimization. And in 2008, an estimated of 1,740 children died from abuse and neglect. Child abuse is basically defined as someone knowingly failing to prevent serious harm to a child. Um, Caucasians normally have the highest rate of the child abuse, and neglect is most frequently type of family violence experienced by family members in the United States. It's also not unusual for a child to die as a result of family violence. More facts about child abuse and neglect. About three quarters of 79.4% of children who were killed as a result of abuse were younger than 4 years old. Infants had the highest rates of fatality of child fatalities. 32.6% were exclusively attributed to neglect. Physical abuse and sexual abuse were major contributors to fatalities. More than 400% of child fatalities were caused by multiple types of maltreatment. Of the perpetrators, 80% were their biological parents, and of the female perpetrators, mostly mothers, outnumbered the men. Of all parents who were the perpetrators, fewer than 8% inflicted sexual abuse, and more than half of all the reports of child abuse and neglect were made by professionals such as medical personnel, teachers, police, attorneys, and social services staff. The remainder was reported by neighbors, friends, and relatives. Abusive parents and their children. Only within the intimacy of family systems do some people feel free to harm each other in physical, sexual, emotional, or inappropriate ways. Women's movement has played a major role in focusing public attention on the issue of violence toward women and children, especially wife battering, marital rape, and incest. Uh, for the definitions and the prevalence of family violence, child maltreatment or abuse behavior that causes significant harm to a child, and or when someone knowingly fails to prevent serious harm to a child. Maltreatment is also known as the same as just abuse and neglect. Physical abuse is considered hurting, injuring, inflicting pain, smothering, drowning, or poisoning. Sexual abuse, direct or indirect sexual exploitation, coercion, or corruption by involving children in an inappropriate sexual activities. Emotional abuse, repeatedly rejecting, humiliating, and denying their worth and rights as being human beings. Also, discounting feelings, humiliating punishment, such as withdrawing love, and shaming children when they make mistakes is considered emotional abuse as well. Neglect, the persistence of the persistent lack of appropriate care of children, including love, stimulation, safety, nourishment, warmth, education, and medical attention. Examples here include failing to supervise children or provide nutritional needs, excessive punishment, child abandonment, infanticide, murder of children, and abandonment of a child's corpse. A child can be abused in more than one area simultaneously. Violence is a broad concept that includes acts of force against family members, which often fall under the guise of discipline and parental control of children. Violence in families can also be directed at both children and adults, and perpetrators are typically parents or adolescent children. Violence in these families can be directed at both the children and the adults. As I stated before, the models of family violence. There are seven basic theoretical models that focus on reasons why parents and children act violently toward each other. The first one is the psychiatric model that assumes that abusive individuals in a family system are deviant or mentally and emotionally ill. Ecological model examines the child and the family from a systems theory perspective, and also the ecological model community supports physical force but doesn't stress support. Abuse is a family problem that affects everyone, and the entire family must receive treatment to promote healthier outcomes. The sociological model stresses that the social values and attitudes about violence shape violent behavior in family systems. The sociological model is also corporal punishment that may be a sanctioned parenting behavior, and violence settles disputes and conflicts with others. Now, with the social psychological model, it covers a variety of approaches that explain violence among family members, interactions with patterns, generational violence, emotional stress. Violence is learned by modeling and serves as a coping mechanism in response to stress. Patriarchy model emphasizes the violence occurs in families as a result of traditional social dominance of adult males, which places women in a subordinate position and condones the use of violence to support male dominance. The exchange and social control model suggests that violence occurs in families when the cost of being violent do not outweigh the rewards. Information processing approach proposes that neglectful parents fail to process information about children's need for care, which can lead to physical neglect, a form of maltreatment. Among those, they do not perceive the behavioral cues given by children. They will ignore the signals from children and don't respond with parent caregiving. They are aware that a parental response is required, but they fail to have one available, and they choose a response that is either inappropriate or never implemented. Factors associated with family violence. Um, Now, a cycle of evidence, a cycle of violence appears to be manifested in the two basic ways. One is when individuals who have violent and abusive childhoods tend to become abusers of their own children. A three-phase sequence in the expression of violent behavior begins with increased intention, a loss of control that is manifested by violent behavior, and the reconciliation period that is characterized by the offender's regret and the victim's forgiveness. Researchers also describe several psychosocial variables that are related to the incident and variety of violent behaviors expressed in the families. The socioeconomic status of a family system is associated with expressions of violence, particularly in the quality of life. Environmental stresses and cultural conditioning or standards may be felt keenly than they are in other social groups. Stress is closely related to domestic violence. Social isolation from other family members increases the risk of abusive behavior directed toward children or a spouse. And another one is the family farm. In this, majority of reported cases of child abuse occur in single parent families of the family forms. Now, with the characteristics of abusive parents, researchers observe several characteristics in adults who abuse their children. The parent is normally unaware that he or she is having an extremely difficult time dealing with the child's behavior. Child rearing patterns typically reflect a rigid, harsh, or authoritarian approach. Statistics point to the mother rather than the father as being more likely to be the abusive parent. And with neglect of children, neglect is considered physical and emotional neglect of children that most frequently reported as maltreatment. And more than about 78% of those children are reported child abuse in the U.S. Parents are also caught and reported for child neglect for the first time may experience a family crisis such as illness, divorce, or desertion. Parents often live in poverty and experience high levels of stress that can be accompanied by depression and anxiety. Those are the reasons for neglecting of children. For the physical abuse of children, many of these parents are not aware that they are doing it and it is wrong and harmful. They have strong beliefs that using physical punishment works for teaching children how to behave. These parents usually have a low tolerance for children's misbehavior, and they also find themselves in situations that are normally highly stressful without sufficient support and without adequate coping skills. uh, Emotional abuse of children. The parents who emotionally abuse children experience low levels of self esteem. They have poor coping skills and they lack child management and techniques. Sexual abuse of children. The majority of those who molest children are other relatives and non relatives with whom the child is familiar with, just being around the setting with. Families in which sexual abuse with children occurs can be characterized by poor boundary controls, poor quality of adult marriage relationship, less harmony and stability in the family system as a whole, and a father who was probably physically abused as a child and acted violently within the family as an adult. There are some long list of characteristics of an abusive adult for all types of abuse, and I'll just name a few. If they had an unhappy childhood, socially isolated from family and friends as neighbors, sees little joy or pleasure in their life, they may be depressed. What else? They have a very limited ability to empathize with others, particularly with his or her own children, and they display a general insensitivity to the needs of others. Now, with treatment and intervention for abusive parents, some of the services include medical care, counseling, psychotherapy, marriage and family therapy, meditation, support groups, crisis hotline, child care, parenting education, and temporary foster care for children. It is unclear if the programs are effective or not in preventing future child abuse and neglect. And the programs that emphasize parenting education and early intervention may be more effective than others, especially in short term effects. There also are some programs that may be beneficial if abusive parents participate in the support groups. A support group such as Parents Anonymous or Parents in Distress. Um, it's in addition to these parenting groups and programs. It basically supports groups that are composed of self referred individuals who are disturbed by their abusive behavior and are fearful of the effects of the continued abuse on the family. Effects of child abuse on children, not only if the child is harmed in the immediate context, but his or her hopes or and dreams for the future are pulled into the battle as well. Violence with families has effects on future marriage formation, cohabitation, and divorce, and has also been linked to teen pregnancy. It also has an effect on how these children will parent their own children because the cycle of abuse may be perpetrated. Being an abused as a child is an important predictor of whether someone will abuse their own children. Substance abuse and alcohol is associated with the physical abuse, and abuse can lead to fatalities. When children are emotionally abused, it increases the likelihood of depression and suicide. Families affected by substance abuse and addictive disorders. The price of substance abuse and addictive disorders, it is high with families. Affected individuals experiences health problems. The economic cost can be enormous and adversely affect families' quality of life, sometimes to the point of bankruptcy. Emotional costs are incalculable, long lasting, and reach into adulthood. When a family member experiences these problems, the children are at risk of developing similar addictions because they are presented with the role models of their parents and other family members. Understanding the effects of abuse, of substance use, and addictive orders. So there are some definitions here on understanding substance use disorder, a maladaptive pattern of substance abuse use leading to clinically significant impairment or distress. Tolerance, there is a need for an increase in the amount of ingested because the same dose fails to have the desired effect. Withdrawal, gradually reducing the amount of the drug. And codependency describes how people close to the person with the addictive disorder also develops problems related to the dependency. A spouse can be affected and can also support the addictive behavior. Substance use disorder, it usually affects school, home, work, and can lead to neglect of the children in the household, and their anger can be aggravated. With tolerance, it's needing more of the drug to get the same effect. And with codependency, it basically describes how those people close to the person with the addictive disorder also develop problems related to dependency. A spouse can be affected and can also support the addictive behavior. And this is basically self defeating behaviors that diminish someone's ability to participate in intimate relationships. The effects of adult family members. When an adult family member develops substance abuse and addictive disorder, they believe that the solution to the problem can be addressed by using a substance. And adults also affected by a chemical dependency or addiction turns to the drug substance for psychological as well as relief. The addictive substance functions to medicate the user in the short term, allowing him or her to cope with whatever they're going through or difficulties at that time. And the user may also lose control of the ability to stop using the product or the substance. The children that are infected by parents with with substance abuse, children may not be aware that their parents have a problem with abuse, substance abuse, or addictive disorders because the parents may deny it. They are likely to develop dependency problems that are similar to those of their parents sometime in point in their lives. They are likely to lack good parental role models and sensitive observe their destructive patterns. It is unlikely that they know what constitutes healthy family life. Frequently, they also can become involved in marriages and relationships with people who behaviorally resemble one or both parents in their family of origin, and children are not likely to seek help from school or counselors because they're not allowed to disclose that information, what really happens outside of their homes. Understanding the effects of substance abuse and use of addictive disorders. Children typically become assigned to a special role in their dysfunctional family that basically helps them maintain unhealthy homeostasis and protects the family secret from becoming public. There are also behavioral characteristics of children affected by parental substance abuse that include the crisis oriented lifestyle, manipulative behavior with others, problems in intimate relationships, an inability to experience pleasure, fearful of being noticed by others, and tendency towards substance use and addictive disorders. And auxiliary programs are available for partners and children of addicted family members as well. Okay, so that wraps up chapter 15, and I hope you all have a great day.